You know, there's a specific kind of quiet that settles over a man when he's convinced his life is already over. It's not a peaceful silence, it's heavy, like wearing a coat soaked in freezing water, and that's exactly how Lucas Bennett felt standing outside the Golden Oak Bistro on Christmas Eve in Boston. The snow was coming down in those thick, wet flakes that stick to your eyelashes, burying the city in white, but Lucas barely felt the cold. He was too busy wrestling with a knot of dread in his stomach that felt a lot like a mistake. He was 36 years old, a guy who fixed HVAC systems and broken furnaces for a living, a guy with calloused hands and a bank account that hovered right around just enough, and he hadn't been on a date in 3 years, not since the night the police knocked on his door with the news about his wife, Sarah, and the black ice that took her away. He'd spent every day since then just trying to keep the world spinning for his daughter, Lily, trying to be enough for a little girl who had lost her mom way too soon. So standing here in his best flannel shirt under a jacket that had seen better days, staring at the warm glow of a high-end restaurant, felt like walking onto a movie set where he didn't know the lines. He'd promised Lily he would try, that was the kicker. He'd looked into her big, hopeful blue eyes that morning while she was coloring at the kitchen table, and he'd nodded when she asked if he was going to meet a princess. Because how do you tell a 7-year-old that princesses don't date guys who smell like copper wire and drywall dust? He took a breath that turned into a cloud of steam, stomped the snow off his work boots. He tried to polish them, but scuffs are stubborn, and pushed open the heavy oak door. The warmth hit him first, smelling of expensive wine and pine needles, and then he saw her. Elena Vance was sitting at a corner table near the window, and princess wasn't even the right word. She looked like royalty from a kingdom Lucas couldn't even find on a map. She was wearing this sleek, dark green dress that probably cost more than Lucas's truck. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and she was checking her watch with the kind of sharp impatience you see in people who charge by the hour. Elena was 34, a senior VP at a marketing firm that handled accounts you see on Super Bowl commercials, and sitting there, she was already regretting letting her friend talk her into this blind date. See, Elena had her own ghosts. She'd lost her little sister, Mia, 10 years ago in a car wreck, and then 3 years ago, her fiancé had cheated on her with her maid of honor right before the wedding. So yeah, her walls were built high and reinforced with steel. She saw Lucas walk in, looking like a deer caught in headlights, looking rough around the edges and visibly uncomfortable, and her heart just sank, not because he wasn't handsome. He had that rugged, tired look that some women go for, but because he looked like a project, and she didn't have the energy for projects anymore. The first 20 minutes were a disaster, honestly. It was painful to watch. Lucas knocked over the salt shaker immediately. His hands were too big for the delicate glassware, and he stumbled through sentences about repairing boilers and Lily's second-grade art class, while Elena offered these tight, polite smiles that didn't reach her eyes, answering his questions with one-word sentences. It was dying on the vine, this date, until a small voice piped up from behind a decorative fir tree near their table. "Daddy," the whisper came, loud enough to cut through the clinking silverware. "She's the one." Lucas froze, his face turning a shade of red that matched the holly on the table. Because Lily wasn't supposed to be there, the babysitter had cancelled last minute due to the storm, so he'd brought her along and set her up at a small table near the coat check with a coloring book and strict instructions to stay put. But there she was, standing in her puffy pink coat, clutching a raggedy stuffed bear named Mr. Pickles, staring at Elena with eyes that held the kind of absolute certainty only kids possess. Elena looked down, startled, her corporate mask slipping for a second as she took in this tiny blonde girl with messy hair and snow boots. "Lily," Lucas sighed, sounding exhausted. "Sweetheart, go back to your coloring, please." But Lily didn't move. She just pointed a small finger at Elena. "She's sad, Daddy," Lily said, matter-of-factly. "Like us." The silence that followed was heavy, thicker than the storm brewing outside. Elena stared at the child, and then her eyes drifted to the silver necklace Lily was pointing at, a jagged, imperfect snowflake pendant that rested against Elena's collarbone. It wasn't expensive jewelry. It was cheap silver, tarnished with age, something bought at a street fair a decade ago for a sister who had loved winter more than anything. "My mommy likes snow too," Lily said, stepping closer, ignoring her father's frantic gestures. "She made paper ones for the windows, but they ripped." Elena felt the air leave her lungs, felt that familiar ache in her chest that she usually kept buried under spreadsheets and conference calls. "My sister gave me this," Elena whispered, her voice cracking, losing that professional polish. She's in heaven now." Lily nodded solemnly. "My mommy too." And just like that, the air in the room changed, the pretension melted away, leaving just 3 people sitting in the wreckage of their own grief. The lights flickered then, a warning buzz, and outside the wind howled, rattling the plate glass windows. The storm had turned nasty while they were sitting there, a full-blown nor'easter burying Boston in white silence. The manager came out, looking frazzled, announcing that the roads were closing, the trains were stopped, and nobody was going anywhere for a while. Panic rippled through the restaurant, people reaching for phones, grabbing coats, but amidst the chaos, Lucas saw something that stopped his heart cold. Lily wasn't by the table anymore. She had been mesmerized by the swirling white void outside, drawn to the beauty of the storm like a moth to a flame, and while the adults were distracted by the announcement, she had slipped out the heavy front door. Lucas turned, saw the empty space where his daughter had been, and the sound that came out of him wasn't a word, it was a roar of pure terror. "Lily!" He bolted for the door, knocking over a chair, not caring about the scene, not caring about anything except the nightmare repeating itself, losing the person he loved to the cold. "And you didn't have to, but you came out there." Elena reached across the table, her hand shaking, and placed it over his. "I couldn't let you be alone in the storm," she said softly. "I know what that feels like." It was a perfect moment, fragile and beautiful, the kind of moment where lives change direction. But life isn't a fairy tale, and every story has a villain waiting in the wings to shatter the peace. Across the room, leaning against the bar with a smirk that looked like it was carved with a razor blade, was Julian Thorne. He was a VP at Elena's firm, a guy who wore suits that cost more than Lucas made in a year, a guy who had been trying to get Elena into bed for 5 years just to prove he could. He'd been watching the whole thing, the awkward date, the panic, the rescue, and he didn't see bravery. He saw an opportunity to humiliate someone he considered beneath him. He walked over, holding a drink, his smile slick and predatory. Well, Julian drawled, his voice loud enough to carry. "Quite the dramatic evening, Elena. Although, I have to say, taking the charity work this literally is a bit much, even for you." Lucas stiffened, his hand freezing on Lily's back. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low. Julian laughed, a cruel, dry sound. "Oh, come on, buddy. The Community Outreach Initiative? Elena's little pet project to date they less fortunate? Give the working man a taste of the high life." He looked at Lucas with mock pity. "She didn't tell you? You're a tax write-off, my friend. A PR stunt." It was a lie, a vicious, poisonous lie designed to crush a man's pride, and it landed perfectly. Lucas looked at Elena, and the devastation in his eyes was absolute. He pulled his hand away from hers like he'd been burned. "Is that true?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Is this charity?" Elena stood up, furious, her face flushing. "No. Lucas, he's lying, he's just jealous and petty, please don't listen to him." But the damage was done. Lucas stood up, lifting Lily, wrapping her tight in the blankets. The shame was radiating off him, the old insecurity that he wasn't enough, that he was just a guy with dirty hands trying to play pretend in a castle. "It's fine," Lucas said, and his voice was dead, devoid of the warmth that had been there seconds ago. "I get it. Thanks for the help with Lily. We should go." He turned his back on her, walking away toward the darker corner of the restaurant to wait out the storm alone, leaving Elena standing there with Julian smiling his oily smile, her heart breaking in a way she hadn't felt in 10 years. The storm outside was raging, but the silence between them was colder than any blizzard. The hours dragged on like a slow death, the restaurant dimly lit by emergency lanterns as the power grid finally gave up the ghost under the weight of the ice. Elena sat alone at her table, the cold coffee in front of her untouched, watching the silhouette of Lucas and Lily across the room. He was sitting on a bench near the kitchen doors, his coat draped over his sleeping daughter, staring out the window with a look of such profound loneliness it made Elena physically ache. Julian had retreated to the bar, smug and satisfied, holding court with a few other stranded patrons, spinning stories about his stock portfolio, completely indifferent to the wreckage he'd caused. Elena wanted to scream, she wanted to march over there and shake Lucas, force him to see the truth, but fear is a powerful paralyzer. She was scared too, scared that maybe Julian was right in a twisted way, not about the charity, but about the mismatch. What did she have to offer a man like that? She was spreadsheets and quarterly targets. He was real, tangible, flesh and blood. She touched the snowflake necklace at her throat, the metal cold against her skin, and remembered her sister Emma, who used to say that the best things in life are the ones you have to fight for, the ones that don't make sense on paper. While she was spiraling in her own head, a small movement caught her eye. Lily had woken up. The little girl slid off the bench, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and looked around. She saw her dad, head in his hands, lost in his own misery, and then she saw Elena. Without waking her father, Lily padded across the room in her thick wool socks, clutching Mr. Pickles by the ear. She stopped in front of Elena's table, looking at her with that unnerving, clear-eyed wisdom kids have. "You made Daddy sad," Lily said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. "But that bad man told a lie, didn't he?" Elena nodded, tears pricking her eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. "He told a very big lie, Lily. I didn't know your daddy was going to be special. I just thought tonight was going to be another mistake. But he isn't a mistake." Lily climbed up onto the chair opposite her, her legs dangling, swinging back and forth. "Daddy thinks he's broken," she whispered, leaning in like she was sharing a state secret. "Because Mommy went away. He thinks broken things get thrown in the trash." Elena reached out and took the little girl's hand, feeling the small, sticky fingers wrap around hers. "I know," she whispered back. "I feel broken too sometimes. My sister went away, and I've been trying to glue myself back together ever since." Lily tilted her head, considering this. "That's silly," she declared. "When Daddy fixes things, like the toaster or my dollhouse, he uses glue. But for people, I think you just need another broken piece to fit with. Like a puzzle." She looked at Elena with absolute seriousness. "I think you're Daddy's puzzle piece, even if he's being dumb right now." Across the room, Lucas jolted awake, panic flaring for a split second before he spotted Lily sitting with Elena. His instinct was to rush over, to snatch her away, to protect her from the woman who saw them as a project. But he stopped. He watched the way Elena was looking at his daughter, not with pity, not with condescension, but with a tenderness that looked painfully familiar. He saw Elena wipe a tear from her cheek, saw the way she listened to whatever Lily was saying with total focus. And he remembered the snow. He remembered her running into the blizzard without a coat. You don't do that for a tax write-off. You don't freeze your lungs for a PR stunt. The dawn broke slowly, a grey, hazy light filtering through the frosted windows as the storm finally blew itself out. The city plows were rumbling by, scraping the asphalt, signaling that the world was waking up. People started gathering their things, eager to escape the makeshift shelter. Lucas stood up, his joints stiff, and walked over to the table. He looked tired, older than his 36 years, but the hardness in his eyes had softened. "I should take her," he said quietly. "Roads look clear enough to walk." Elena stood up, facing him. She didn't plead, she didn't apologize again. She just looked him dead in the eye, stripping away the CEO persona, the armor, everything. "Lucas, look at me. I don't care about your job. I don't care about your bank account. I care that you're the only man I've met in 10 years who ran into a storm for someone he loves. I care that you made me feel safe. Julian is a liar and a coward. Don't let him win. Don't let him decide how this story ends." Lucas looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the messy hair, the ruined makeup, the raw honesty. He looked at Lily, who was grinning like she'd just pulled off a heist. "I'm scared," Lucas admitted, his voice rough. "I haven't done this since Sarah. I don't know how to do this." Elena took a step closer, closing the gap between them. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "But I think we are supposed to be scared together." Lucas let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 3 years. He reached out and took her hand, his rough, calloused hand engulfing her manicured one. Can I call you? For real. Not a charity call." Elena laughed, a wet, choke sound. "If you don't call me, I'm going to show up at your house and demand a refund on this date." They walked out of the golden oak together into the crisp, blindingly white morning. The city was silent, buried under 2 feet of snow, looking like a blank page waiting to be written on. Julian was nowhere to be seen, probably sneaking out the back to avoid the bill, irrelevant and forgotten. 3 days later, Elena's phone rang. It was Lucas. They talked for 4 hours, about everything and nothing. About plumbing, about marketing strategies, about how much they missed the people they'd lost. And then, a year later, on Christmas Eve, the scene wasn't a fancy restaurant. It was a small, slightly cramped apartment in South Boston that smelled of cinnamon and sawdust. There was a lopsided tree in the corner, decorated with strings of popcorn and mismatched ornaments. Elena was sitting on the floor, wearing jeans, and one of Lucas's flannel shirts, covered in glitter. Lucas was in the kitchen, trying to bake cookies and burning them slightly, singing along to the radio off-key. Lily was directing the operation, holding a pair of scissors. "Okay," Lily commanded. "Now you fold it like this, Elena. You have to make it pointy." They were making paper snowflakes. Dozens of them. Taping them to the windows until the glass was covered in white paper stars. "Like this?" Elena asked, holding up a jagged, imperfect snowflake. Lily inspected it critically. "Perfect," she decided. "It looks real because it's messy." Lucas came in from the kitchen with a plate of slightly charred gingerbread men, looking at the two of them, the corporate executive and the little girl, sitting in his living room like they'd always been there. The hole in his chest, the one that had been whistling with cold wind for years, finally felt filled. He set the cookies down and sat next to Elena, wrapping an arm around her. "You know," he said softly, "Bridget was right. You were the one." Elena leaned her head on his shoulder, looking at the paper snowflakes spinning in the heat from the radiator. "She's always right," she murmured. "We just had to catch up." Outside, the snow started to fall again, dusting the city in white. But inside, it was warm. It wasn't a fairy tale ending with a castle and a fortune. It was better. It was real. It was messy, and patched together with glue and hope, and strong enough to weather any storm. So, here's the question I want to leave you with, and be honest in the comments. We live in a world that tells us to stick to our own kind, to date within our tax bracket, to protect our hearts at all costs. But if you were sitting in that restaurant, watching a stranger run into a blizzard, would you have followed them? Or would you have stayed safe inside? Do you believe that two broken people can make a whole? Or are some things just too shattered to fix? Let me know what you think. Because personally, I think the glue is the strongest part. Thanks for listening.